6 days. In 6 days, according to the oldest text of Western civilization, everything that exists, every star, every ocean, every molecule of oxygen entering your lungs right now, was brought into existence out of absolute nothingness. Not from pre-existing matter, not from a random explosion, from nothing. And when I say nothing, I am not talking about an empty, dark space. I am talking about the absence of the very concept of space. Darkness did not exist because darkness needs a place to exist, and there was no place. Silence did not exist because silence presupposes a universe capable of producing sound. What existed before the first verse of Genesis is something the human brain literally cannot process. And that is exactly where the most ambitious story ever told begins. A story that covers more than 2,000 years in 50 chapters, including the first family, the first murder, the first global genocide, the first civilization, the first war, and a 17-year-old boy thrown into a pit by his own brothers who ends up becoming the most powerful man in Egypt. But how does it all connect? And why were so many brutal and disturbing details preserved with such precision for over 3 millennia? The answer will change the way you see this book. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You have probably heard this phrase hundreds of times, but here is what almost no one realizes. The original Hebrew text uses the word bara, to create out of nothing. This word appears throughout the Hebrew Bible, but it is always reserved exclusively for God. No human being, no angel, no creature is ever given the verb bara as its subject. Only God creates out of nothing. Everything else transforms what already exists. This distinction is fundamental, because what Genesis is saying in the very first line is not simply God made the world. It is something much more radical. It is saying that before God acted, there was absolutely nothing outside of him. No matter, no energy, no laws of physics. He did not reorganize chaos. He invented the very possibility of existence. And verse 2 describes the state immediately following this first creation. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Visualize this, a formless mass of matter and water suspended in total darkness. No stars, no sun, no source of light in any direction. And in the midst of this absolute void, a presence moving over the surface of the waters like a breathing wind. The Hebrew text uses mereshephe, the same word used to describe an eagle hovering over its young. It is not a distant God observing from afar. It is something intimate, close, almost touching that raw matter before shaping it. And then comes the first sentence ever spoken in the universe, "Let there be light." 4 words in English. In Hebrew, it is even shorter, yehi, or 2 sounds. And with those 2 sounds, electromagnetic energy comes into existence. Photons shoot in every direction at 300,000 kilometers per second. And here is a detail that has intrigued theologians and scientists for centuries. Light was created on the first day, but the sun only appears on the 4th day. This is not a mistake. This is a statement. The text is deliberately saying that light existed before the stars, before the sun, before any natural source of illumination. There was already light. Where did it come from? Genesis does not explain, it simply records it. What the text describes in the 6 days of creation is not a random list. There is an architecture. In the first 3 days, God creates the spaces, light and darkness, sky and waters, land and vegetation. In the following 3 days, he fills those spaces. Day 4, sun, moon, and stars fill the space of light created on day 1. Day 5, fish and birds fill the waters and the sky of day 2. Day 6, land animals and the human being fill the land of day 3. It is a mirrored structure. 3 days of formation, 3 days of filling, symmetrical, deliberate. And this structure was not noticed by modern scholars. It has been there since the first time this text was written. But the moment that changes everything comes in verse 26 of chapter 1. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Pay attention to the plural. Let us, our. In all the rest of creation, God simply commands, let there be light, let there be a firmament, let the earth bring forth. These are direct commands, but when it comes to the human being, the tone changes completely. There is a deliberation, a pause, as if, for the first time in the creative process, God was making a decision that carried a weight different from all the previous ones. And then Genesis chapter 2 zooms in. If chapter 1 is the panoramic view, universe being assembled in 6 acts, chapter 2 is the camera descending to ground level. And what it shows is surprisingly physical. The Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. The Hebrew word is yatsar, to mold, as a potter molds clay. It is not bara, creating from nothing. It is manual labor. God putting his hands in the earth, in the mud, molding a human form with the same intimacy as a sculptor. And then he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Imagine the scene. A clay figure lying on the ground of a garden, perfect in every anatomical detail, every bone, every muscle, every neural synapse in place, but lifeless, inert as a statue. And then God approaches, leans in, and breathes, and the eyes open. The first human being wakes up in a garden, but not just any garden. Genesis 2:8 says that God planted a garden in Eden, in the east, and the text gives coordinates. 4 rivers rise there: the Pishon, the Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. 2 of these rivers still exist today. The Tigris and Euphrates flow through what is now Iraq, converging in a region that archaeologists call the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of human civilization. Coincidence? Scholars debate this to this day, but what Genesis describes is not an ethereal paradise floating in the clouds. It is a real place with real geography, at a point on the planet that science confirms as one of the oldest regions of human occupation. And inside that garden were 2 trees that would define the destiny of the entire species: the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The instruction was simple, absurdly simple. You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Total freedom with a single restriction. And here is what many people do not realize. The prohibition was not an arbitrary test. It was not God setting a trap. It was a limit, the boundary between the creature and the Creator. The tree represented the right to define what is good and what is evil, and that right belonged to God, not to man. Eve was not created as a secondary detail. The Hebrew text uses the expression Ezer Kenegdo, a corresponding helper. The word Ezer appears in other passages of the Bible, always associated with help, strength, and rescue. It is the same word used to describe God as the help of Israel. It is not a word of submission, it is a word of power. And Kenegdo means equal to equal, face to face. Adam was alone in the garden. God brought all the animals before him so that he could name them. And Genesis makes a point of recording that for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. He saw every species, every animal had its pair, and he did not. This loneliness was not accidental, it was pedagogical. God wanted Adam to feel the void before filling it. And then came the sleep, the first deep sleep in history. And when Adam woke up, she was there, and his reaction is the first poetry in the Bible. This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. In Hebrew, the phrase has cadence, rhyme, and rhythm. It is a poem of ecstasy. The first man looking at the first woman and recognizing in her something that no animal, no landscape, no wonder of the garden had given him, someone equal to himself. But paradise did not last long. And what destroyed everything was not an army, not a natural disaster, not a disease. It was a conversation. Genesis 3 opens with the serpent, and the text makes a point of saying that it was more crafty than any other beast of the field, not stronger, not faster, more crafty, and its strategy was not a direct attack. It was a question. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden"? Notice the distortion. God had said they could eat of all the trees except one. The serpent inverts it, turning freedom into restriction. It makes it look like God was forbidding everything, when in fact he had forbidden almost nothing. And Eve corrects it. But in the correction, she herself adds something. She says, "Neither shall you touch it." God never said anything about touching. She exaggerated the prohibition, and this exaggeration opened a gap. Because the serpent now had material to work with. You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. It is the first recorded lie in history. And notice that it does not completely deny the truth. It twists it. It mixes truth with deception. Their eyes did indeed open. They did indeed come to know good and evil, but the price the serpent hid was death. Verse 6 is devastating in its simplicity. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Just a few lines. No cinematic drama, no suspenseful music. The most catastrophic moment in human history happens in a sentence and a half. And notice something most people ignore. She also gave some to her husband who was with her. Adam was there the whole time. He heard the entire conversation. He was not deceived. He chose. And immediately the eyes of both were opened. But what they saw was not power. It was not divinity. It was shame. They knew that they were naked. The first human emotion after the fall was not anger, not fear, not sadness. It was shame, a sudden and unbearable awareness of exposure. And the instinctive reaction. They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. The first human attempt to cover up, to hide what had become unbearable to show. And then comes the most terrifying sound in the chapter. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Until that moment, that sound meant communion. It meant presence. It meant safety. Now, for the first time, that same sound provoked terror. They hid among the trees. And God asked a question that was not for him. It was for them. Where are you? God knew exactly where they were. The question was a mirror. It was God saying, "Do you realize where you have placed yourselves?" Adam's answer reveals everything. "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself." Fear, nakedness, hiding. 3 words that did not exist in the human vocabulary until that moment. And when God asks if he ate from the tree, Adam does not take responsibility. He says, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit of the tree, and I ate." Notice, he blames Eve, and he blames God in the same sentence. "The woman whom you gave me." It is not just cowardice. It is the first demonstration of something that will mark the entire history of Genesis, the human inability to take responsibility. The consequences came in a cascade. For the serpent, to crawl in the dust forever. For Eve, multiplied pain in childbirth and a tension with her husband that did not exist before. For Adam, the cursed ground, food conquered by sweat, and in the end, the return to the dust from which he came. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The death sentence was pronounced, not instantaneous, procedural. Adam lived 930 years according to Genesis 5, but death entered, like a slow poison, corroding from within something that had been designed to last forever. And God expelled them from the garden. But before, and this detail is extraordinary, before expelling them, God made garments of skins for them and clothed them. The fig leaves they had sown were not enough. God replaced their improvised covering with something that required death. An animal died to cover human shame. It is the first death recorded in the Bible, and it was not Abel's. It was that of a nameless animal, sacrificed by God to clothe those who had disobeyed. Many theologians see here the first shadow of the sacrifice that would come millennia later. But Genesis does not explain, it simply records it and moves on. And what came next was worse than anyone could have imagined, because the first couple had children, and in a single generation the damage multiplied irreversibly. Cain and Abel, the first two human beings born, not created, and what happened between them was not just any rivalry. It was something so dark that it set a pattern that humanity has never been able to break. Both brought offerings to God. Abel, a keeper of sheep, brought the firstborn of his flock, the best animals, the fat portions, the most valuable things. Cain, a worker of the ground, brought fruit of the ground. Genesis 4:4-5 says that the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. The text does not explain exactly why, but there is a subtle clue. The Hebrew says that Abel brought of the firstborn and of their fat portions, first fruits, the best. For Cain, it says only that he brought an offering of the fruit of the ground, no qualification, no best, no first fruits. The difference was not in the type of offering, it was in the attitude behind it. And Cain's reaction when his offering was rejected reveals something terrible about what was already happening inside the human heart. He was very angry, his face fell, and God, in a gesture of mercy that almost no one comments on, spoke directly to him. "Why are you angry? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it." It is one of the most revealing sentences in all of Genesis. God is describing sin as a living entity, crouching at the door, waiting for the moment to attack, and saying to Cain, "You can overcome it. You have a choice." Cain chose. He invited Abel to go to the field, and there, far from any witness, he killed his own brother. The first murder in human history, and it was not between strangers. It was not between enemies. It was between brothers. Blood of the same blood, flesh of the same flesh. And when God asked, "Where is Abel, your brother?" Cain's answer echoed the same inability as Adam's, but worse. "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Adam at least admitted he ate. Cain lied, and besides lying, he challenged. In one generation, humanity went from hiding from God to confronting him. And here, Genesis accelerates. Chapters 4 and 5 cover centuries in a few verses. Cain's lineage expanded. Cities were built, metallurgy was invented, music emerged. Tubal-Cain forged instruments of bronze and iron. Jubal played the harp and flute. Civilization advanced, but violence advanced with it. Lamech, a descendant of Cain, boasted to his wives, "I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me." And he added, "If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. Violence ceased to be an act of loss of control. It became pride, identity, culture. Meanwhile, in parallel, Genesis traces another lineage, Seth, the third son of Adam, and his descendants. And in the middle of this genealogy, a phrase appears that is almost lost. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. While Cain's lineage built cities and manufactured weapons, Seth's lineage prayed. Two paths, two civilizations growing side by side. And Genesis is preparing the ground for something catastrophic, because when we reach chapter 6, the text changes tone completely. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually, continually. Three absolutes in a single sentence. The diagnosis leaves no room for doubt. And then comes the darkest verse in all of Genesis, perhaps in the entire Bible. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. Stop and process this. The same God who molded Adam with his own hands, who breathed life into his nostrils, who planted a garden for him, who brought the animals for him to name, who built a companion for him from his own body, this God now regrets having created him, and he feels pain. The Hebrew text uses itzavon, the same word for Eve's pain in childbirth. God feels a kind of labor pain in reverse. The creation he brought into the world with such care now tears his heart apart. But in the midst of this cosmic grief, one sentence prevents the definitive end. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. One man, a single righteous man in an entire corrupted civilization. And it was enough. Not to save the world as it was, but to start over. And what God asked of this man was something that no human mind of that time could conceive: to build a structure 300 cubits long, 50 wide, and 30 high, the equivalent of 140 meters long by 23 wide by 14 high, larger than a football field, taller than a 4-story building, made entirely of wood, coated with pitch inside and out, with 3 internal decks and a single door. And all this in a world that, according to many scholars, had possibly never seen rain. Genesis 2:6 says that a mist was going up from the land and was watering the whole face of the ground. Imagine explaining to your neighbors that you are building a giant ship because something called rain is going to fall from the sky and destroy everything, in an era when no one knew what rain was. But what happened when that rain finally came, and what happened inside that ark in the following months, is one of the most brutal and ingenious stories ever recorded, and no one has told you the full version. Genesis 7:11 records the date with surgical precision. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. It was not just rain, read it again. 2 simultaneous sources. The sky opened from above, and the earth tore open from below. The fountains of the great deep. The Hebrew text uses tehom rabbah, the same tehom from Genesis 1:2, the primordial abyss over which the Spirit of God hovered before creation. It is as if God were undoing creation, rewinding the process. The waters he had separated on the 2nd day, waters above the firmament and waters below, were being reunited again. The world was returning to original chaos. And it rained 40 days and 40 nights without stopping. 40 days. Try to imagine. Not a storm that comes and goes, not a heavy downpour with breaks. 40 consecutive days of torrential rain combined with underground eruptions of water. The rivers overflowed, the valleys filled, the plains disappeared, and the people who laughed at Noah for decades, those who mocked the ship in the middle of dry land, now knocked on the door of the ark, and the door was closed. Genesis 7:16 says something chilling. The Lord shut him in. It was not Noah who locked the door. It was God, the same God who had given centuries of warning, who had commanded Noah to preach, who had waited patiently while the ark was being built. This God now sealed the door, and on the outside, the world died. The waters rose 15 cubits above the highest mountains, approximately 7 meters above the highest visible peak. There was nowhere to run. There was not enough high ground. Genesis 7:21-23 describes the extinction with a rawness that the text does not try to soften. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. Notice the repetition. All flesh, all swarming creatures, all mankind, everything. It is as if the text wanted to eliminate any doubt. There were no exceptions. There were no survivors outside the ark, and breath of life in his nostrils. It is the same expression used when God breathed life into Adam. The breath God gave, God took away. And inside the ark, 8 people. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their 3 daughters-in-law. 8 human beings on a wooden ship floating over a submerged world, caring for hundreds of species of animals, not knowing when it would end. The text does not romanticize it. It does not describe family conversations around a campfire. It does not show Noah looking out the window with hope. It shows silence and water and waiting, 150 days, 5 months. The waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days before they began to recede. 5 months floating without a horizon, without dry land, without any visual reference other than water in every direction. And then Genesis 8:1, one of the most powerful and ignored sentences in the Bible. But God remembered Noah, not that God had forgotten. The Hebrew word zakar does not mean to recover a lost memory. It means to turn one's attention with the intention to act. God turned his face back toward Noah, and he made a wind blow over the earth. The fountains of the deep were closed, the windows of the heavens were stopped, and the waters began to recede. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, in modern-day Turkey, a mountain range that reaches over 5,000 meters in altitude. And Noah waited. He opened the window and sent out a raven, which flew back and forth without returning. Then he sent out a dove, which returned. It had not found dry land. 7 days later, he sent the dove out again, and it returned with an olive leaf in its beak. 1 leaf. After months of total destruction, of an entire world submerged and devastated, an olive tree somewhere had survived enough to sprout. Life was returning, and on the 3rd time the dove did not return. It had found a place to stay. The world was resurfacing. Noah left the ark, and the first thing he did was build an altar. Not a house, not a fence, not a shelter, an altar, and he offered sacrifices. And Genesis 8:21 says that the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, and he made a promise, I will never again curse the ground because of man. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And he sealed this promise with something visible, the rainbow, the first formal covenant between God and humanity. Not with a document, not with a signature, with a phenomenon that appears every time rain and sun meet. A reminder in the sky, visible to the naked eye, that such destruction would not be repeated. But notice what God said within this promise. The intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. God did not delude himself. He knew that the flood had not fixed the problem. Human wickedness did not drown. It entered the ark along with the 8 survivors. And it took only a few verses to prove it. Noah planted a vineyard, he made wine, he drank, and he became drunk. The man who stood alone against an entire civilization, who built a ship over decades under mockery, who carried the biological future of the planet on his shoulders, this man fell. Not before an epic temptation, not facing a powerful enemy, before a bottle of wine. And while he was drunk and naked in his tent, Ham, his middle son, entered, saw his father's nakedness, and went out to tell his brothers. Shem and Japheth did the opposite. They took a garment, laid it on their shoulders, walked backward into the tent, and covered their father without looking. Noah's reaction when he woke up was violent. He cursed Canaan, the son of Ham, and he blessed Shem and Japheth. And this blessing and this curse will reverberate throughout the rest of the Bible. The nations that descend from each son will cross paths, face each other, and define themselves for generations. But the immediate point is different. The new beginning failed before it started. The post-flood world carries the same disease as the pre-flood world. Noah was not perfect, he was righteous. But righteous does not mean immune. And Genesis wants you to understand this before moving forward, because what humanity did next shows that the problem was never environmental, it was never circumstantial, it was internal. Genesis 11, Tower of Babel. The generations multiplied. A single language united the whole earth, and migrating to the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, a region historians identify as Mesopotamia, southern Iraq today. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Read that motivation again. It was not scientific curiosity. It was not practical necessity. It was let us make a name for ourselves, fame, legacy, autonomy, and lest we be dispersed, in direct opposition to God's command, who had said, "Fill the earth." God commanded them to spread out. They decided to concentrate. God commanded them to fill the world. They decided to build a monument to themselves. It is the same pattern as Eden. "You will be like God," the serpent said. "Let us make a name for ourselves," said humanity. The same temptation in different clothes. And God came down. The text is almost ironic. "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built." They wanted to reach the sky, and God had to come down to see what they were building. The scale that seemed monumental to men was microscopic to God, and he confused the languages. From one day to the next, the bricklayers did not understand the engineers. The engineers did not understand the supervisors. Communication, the basis of any collective project, collapsed, and the city remained unfinished. And the name they wanted to make for themselves became Babel, confusion, and this is where Genesis makes the most important transition in the entire book. Because until now, the narrative was universal: creation, fall, flood, dispersion, the history of all humanity. But starting in chapter 12, the camera zooms in. The framing changes from all the earth to a single man, in a single city, in a single family. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." Abram, who would later be called Abraham, lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, one of the most advanced cities of the ancient world. Located in southern Mesopotamia, Ur had monumental architecture, an irrigation system, cuneiform writing, international trade, and a sophisticated polytheistic religion centered on the moon god Nana. British archaeologists excavated Ur in the 1920s and found royal tombs with gold jewelry, musical instruments decorated with lapis lazuli, and evidence of ritual human sacrifice. It was a metropolis, and God told Abram to leave everything, leave the city, leave the extended family, leave his father's house, and go where? To the land that I will show you, without a map, without coordinates, without guarantees, just a promise. "I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." And Abram went. Genesis 12:4. So Abram went, as the Lord had told him. He was 75 years old. He took Sarai, his wife, Lot, his nephew, and all the possessions and servants they had accumulated. They crossed hundreds of kilometers of desert and arrived in Canaan, the land God had promised. But when he arrived, the land was not empty. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Imagine you leave everything, cross the desert obeying a voice, arrive at the promised destination, and discover that people are already living there. And God did not expel the Canaanites. He did not hand over the land on a silver platter. He simply said, "To your offspring I will give this land." Future, promise, not immediate reality. And what came next was not prosperity, it was famine. Genesis 12:10. Now there was a famine in the land. The land God promised was in crisis, and Abram went down to Egypt. And in Egypt, the patriarch of faith did something that stains his biography forever. Afraid that the Egyptians would kill him to take his wife, Sarai was very beautiful. Abram said she was his sister. A half-truth. She was indeed his half-sister. But the intention was deception, and Pharaoh took Sarai into his house, and he treated Abram well for her sake. Sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. Abram became rich at the expense of his own wife's honor, until God intervened, sent plagues upon Pharaoh's house, and the truth came to light. And Pharaoh, a pagan, an idolater, rebuked Abram. "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife?" The man chosen by God was morally corrected by an Egyptian pharaoh. Genesis does not protect its heroes. It does not edit their flaws. It does not soften their falls. And this brutal honesty is one of the reasons the text has survived 3,000 years, because it rings true. Back in Canaan, wealth brought a new problem. Abram and Lot had herds too large for the same region. The herdsmen fought, and Abram, in a gesture that reveals growth, gave Lot the right to choose first. "If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." Lot looked and saw the Jordan Valley, well-watered, green, fertile, like the garden of the Lord. And he chose. He went east. He moved his tents as far as Sodom, and Genesis makes a point of noting, now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Lot chose by the landscape. He did not ask who the neighbors were, and that choice would cost him almost everything he had. But Abram stayed in Canaan, and after Lot had parted, God spoke again. "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward, for all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth." Abram did not have a single child. His wife was sterile, and God promised countless descendants. It is the kind of promise that only makes sense if the one who promises can fulfill the impossible. Years passed. The promise was not fulfilled. Sarai remained sterile, and in Genesis 15, Abram finally confronted God. "O Lord God, what will you give me, for I continue childless?" It is the question of a man who obeyed, who left everything, who waited, and who now looks at his own life and sees the promise dissolving with age. And God took him outside the tent at night and said, "Look toward heaven and number the stars if you are able to number them. So shall your offspring be. Desert sky, no light pollution, thousands of stars visible to the naked eye, perhaps millions." And Abram, childless, old, with a sterile wife, looked at that sky and did something that changed the history of theology forever. He believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. He did not offer a sacrifice. He did not perform a ritual. He did not obey a commandment. He believed, and God counted that as righteousness. It is the first time in the Bible that someone's faith is recognized as merit. And Paul, millennia later, will use exactly this verse to build the Christian theology of salvation by faith. It all began with an old, childless man looking at the stars and deciding to believe in the impossible. But Abram's faith had limits, Sarai's too. And in Genesis 16, the two took matters into their own hands. Sarai offered Hagar, her Egyptian servant, as a concubine. "It may be that I shall obtain children by her." The practice was common in the ancient East. Mesopotamian documents confirm that sterile wives could offer servants as substitutes. It was not scandalous in the culture of the time, but it was an attempt to humanly manufacture what God had promised, supernaturally, and it worked, biologically. Hagar became pregnant, and immediately the domestic balance collapsed. Hagar began to despise Sarai. Sarai blamed Abram. Abram gave the problem back to Sarai, and Sarai mistreated Hagar until she fled into the desert. And there, alone, pregnant, a fugitive, at a spring of water on the way to Shur, the angel of the Lord found her. And he asked, "Where have you come from and where are you going?" And he told her to return. And he promised, "I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." The son was born. Ishmael, God hears. Abram was 86 years old, and for 13 years he believed that Ishmael was the fulfilled promise. 13 years thinking that God's plan had been realized through Hagar. 13 years living in the human solution, not knowing that God still had something completely different in mind. Because when Abram turned 99, God appeared again and said something that must have made the old patriarch question his own sanity. "Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son." Sarah was 90 years old, and Abraham, because now God had changed his name, fell on his face and laughed. He laughed. The Hebrew text uses Yitzhak. He laughed. And from that laughter would come the name of the promised son, Isaac. He laughs. God turned Abraham's unbelief into a birth certificate. But before the laughter became a cradle, God had pending business. And in Genesis 18, 3 men appeared before Abraham's tent by the oaks of Mamre in the heat of the day. Abraham ran to meet them. He bowed. He offered water to wash their feet, shade to rest, and bread to eat. Then he ran to the tent, asked Sarah to knead 3 seahs of fine flour, nearly 20 liters, and went to the herd to get a tender and good calf. Butter, milk, meat, an improvised banquet in minutes. Hospitality in the ancient East was not courtesy. It was a code of honor. Refusing a traveler was a dishonor, and Abraham served without knowing exactly whom he was serving. And then one of the visitors said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Sarah heard from the entrance of the tent, and she laughed to herself, hidden. But God heard the silent laughter. Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? Sarah denied it. "I did not laugh." And God replied, "No, but you did laugh." 2 laughs, husband and wife, before the same impossible promise. One open, one hidden, both heard. But the visitors had not come only to confirm the promise. They had another destination, Sodom. And when they stood up and looked toward the city, the Lord said something extraordinary, not to Abraham, but to himself. "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do?" And he revealed, "Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave." God was about to destroy the cities, and Abraham, the same man who had lied to Pharaoh, who had manufactured an heir through Hagar, who had laughed at the promise, this man did something no one before him had done in the biblical text. He negotiated with God. "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it?" And God said, "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake." And Abraham continued. 45, 40, 30, 20, 10, 6 rounds of negotiation, each time bolder. "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once." It is a scene of absurd intimacy. A nomad in the desert bargaining with the creator of the universe for the fate of a city. And God accepted every reduction. If there were 10 righteous in Sodom, the city would be spared. There were not. The 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening. Lot was sitting in the gate of the city, a position that indicates he was an established citizen, possibly a judge or local authority. He invited them into his house. He insisted. And before they lay down, the men of the city surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. The text makes a point of saying all. No exception for age, no exception for neighborhood, the whole city, and they demanded that Lot hand over the visitors. Lot's response was horrific by any standard. He offered his own daughters. The men refused. They pressed hard against the door. And the angels pulled Lot inside, shut the door, and struck the crowd with blindness. And even blind, the text says they continued groping, searching for the entrance. This detail is what makes the scene so disturbing. Blindness did not stop them. It did not make them stop and think. It did not make them retreat. They kept trying. The compulsion was stronger than sight itself. The angels told Lot to gather his family and leave. Lot went to speak to his sons-in-law, and they thought he was joking. They laughed. At dawn, the angels seized Lot by the hand, him, his wife, and his 2 daughters, and pulled them out by force. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand. Lot hesitated. Even after all he saw the night before, even with angels saying, "Flee," even with imminent destruction, he hesitated. He was too comfortable. He had built too much life there, and the instruction was clear: escape for your life. Do not look back. And then the Lord rained sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. The Hebrew word for sulfur, gophrith, is the same root used to describe volcanic materials. Archaeologists who studied the region south of the Dead Sea found layers of ash, spheres of pure sulfur, and evidence of thermal destruction at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. The cities were incinerated, and Lot's wife looked back. One sentence, one action, one result. She became a pillar of salt. The Dead Sea region has natural salt formations everywhere, pillars of salt that emerge from the ground like accidental sculptures. And one of them has carried that name for millennia. Lot escaped with his daughters to a cave in the mountains of Zoar. And what happened in that cave, the daughters getting their father drunk, conceiving children by him, generated 2 nations, Moab and Ammon, peoples who will haunt Israel for centuries, all born from a choice Lot made chapters ago, when he looked at the green plain and did not ask who the neighbors were. And in the midst of all this, destruction, flight, salt, caves, the promise followed its course. Sarah became pregnant. Genesis 21:1. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. She was 90 years old, Abraham 100, and the son was born, Isaac. He laughs. Sarah said, "God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me." The laughter of incredulity was transformed into the laughter of joy. The impossible was nursing at the breast of a 90-year-old woman, but joy brought conflict. Ishmael, the son of Hagar, was already 14 years old, and when Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac or playing with him, the Hebrew word is ambiguous, she demanded, "Cast out this slave woman with her son." Abraham suffered. The text says the thing was very displeasing to him on account of Ishmael. Because Ishmael was also his son, he was also his flesh. And God said, "Be not displeased. Listen to Sarah, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring." Abraham woke up early in the morning. He gave Hagar bread and a skin of water, and he sent them away. A skin of water for the desert. Imagine the weight of that morning. And Hagar wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba until the water was gone. And she put the boy under one of the bushes, and she sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bowshot, and she wept. "Let me not look on the death of the child." And God heard the voice of the boy, and he opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well. And the boy grew up in the wilderness of Paran, became an archer, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. And Islamic tradition identifies Ishmael as the ancestor of the Prophet Muhammad and the Arab peoples, a lineage that begins with an Egyptian servant, a skin of water, and a boy crying under a bush. Isaac grew up. And then came the test that defines Abraham forever. Genesis 22. 5 words in Hebrew that open the chapter like a door to the abyss. Veha Elohim Nissa et Avraham. And God tested Abraham, and he said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering." Notice the construction. He did not say, just your son. He said, your only son. Then, whom you love. Each specification is a layer of weight. God wanted Abraham to feel the exact size of what he was asking, and Abraham rose early in the morning. There is no record of hesitation. There is no record of argument, and this is the same man who negotiated 6 rounds for Sodom. He cut the wood for the burnt offering. He saddled the donkey. He took Isaac and 2 servants, and he set out. 3 days of walking, 3 days knowing what awaited at the top of that mountain, 3 nights sleeping beside the son he was to sacrifice the next morning. On the 3rd day he saw the place. He left the servants with the donkey. He placed the wood on Isaac's back. He took the fire and the knife in his own hand, and the 2 went on together. And Isaac asked, "My father, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" The question of a child who knows the ritual, who knows a piece is missing, who trusts his father enough to ask without fear. And Abraham replied, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." 7 words that cross the entire Bible like an arrow. God will provide, and they reached the place. Abraham built the altar. He laid the wood in order. He bound Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. He reached out his hand. He took the knife to slaughter his own son. And the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay your hand on the boy, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham lifted his eyes and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket, and he offered it in place of Isaac, and he called that place, "The Lord will provide," Jehovah Jireh, Mount Moriah. The same location where, according to 2 Chronicles 3:1, Solomon would build the Temple of Jerusalem 1,000 years later. The place of the near sacrifice became the place of the temple. The geography of the Bible is not accidental. Sarah died at the age of 127 in Hebron. Abraham wept for her, and he bought the cave of Machpelah to bury her, the first real property the family owned in the Promised Land. It was not a gift from God. It was not a military conquest. It was a commercial transaction, negotiated in detail in chapter 23, with witnesses, an agreed price, 400 shekels of silver, and a public record. The promise said, all this land. The reality was a cave bought to bury his wife. The distance between the promise and the possession was measured in entire generations. And Abraham sent his oldest servant back to Mesopotamia to find a wife for Isaac. Not a Canaanite woman, a woman from the family. And the servant found Rebekah by a well, carrying her jar, offering water to the camels, fulfilling exactly the signs the servant had asked of God. And Rebekah came, and Isaac loved her. And Abraham died at the age of 175. And Ishmael and Isaac, the 2 sons whom life had separated, reunited to bury their father in the cave of Machpelah beside Sarah. Isaac and Rebekah, the next generation. And the pattern repeated. Rebekah was sterile. 20 years of marriage without children. Isaac prayed, and God answered. Rebekah became pregnant with twins, and the boys struggled within her. The Hebrew word suggests actual violence, not normal pregnancy movements. And Rebekah asked God, "Why is this happening to me?" And God replied, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. The older shall serve the younger. In a culture where primogeniture was law, where the eldest son inherited double, where birth order defined social hierarchy, God inverted the rule even before birth. The first to be born was Esau, red, hairy like a cloak of hair. Second was born gripping his brother's heel. Jacob, the one who grabs the heel, or figuratively, the supplanter. The name was already a prophecy. Esau grew up as a hunter, a man of the field. Jacob was quiet, dwelling in tents, and Isaac loved Esau because of the game. Rebekah loved Jacob. A family divided in alliances before the children were old enough to understand what was at stake. And on an ordinary day, Esau returned from the field exhausted, and Jacob was cooking a lentil stew, red. The text repeats the color, this red stew, this red stuff. And Esau said, "Let me eat." And Jacob saw the opportunity, "Sell me your birthright today." The birthright was not just a material inheritance, it was a spiritual position. It was the lineage of Abraham's promise. It was the future of the covenant with God. And Esau said, "Behold, I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" And he sold it for a bowl of lentils. Genesis 25:34 closes the scene with a dry sentence. Thus Esau despised his birthright. It does not blame Jacob for the manipulation. It blames Esau for the contempt. The problem was not the trade, it was the evaluation. Esau measured eternity by the size of his hunger. But the sold birthright needed something else to be realized, the father's blessing. And when Isaac grew old and his eyes failed, he called Esau. "Go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me delicious food, that my soul may bless you before I die." And Rebekah heard, and she hatched a plan. She dressed Jacob in Esau's clothes, which smelled of the field. She covered his hands and neck with goatskins to imitate Esau's hairiness, and she sent Jacob with the stew. Isaac was suspicious. The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. The lie worked through touch, not voice. And Isaac blessed Jacob with the blessing that belonged to the firstborn. "May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you." When Esau returned and the truth exploded, Isaac trembled violently. Esau cried out, a great and very bitter cry, and he asked, "Have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also." And he wept. Isaac gave him a lesser blessing, almost an anti-blessing. And Esau vowed to kill Jacob. Rebekah sent Jacob to flee to her brother Laban's house in Haran. And on that first night of flight, alone with a stone for a pillow, Jacob dreamed. A ladder or ramp set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and angels were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood above it and said, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring." The promise of Abraham passing through Isaac, now reaching a fugitive lying on the ground with a stone at his neck. And Jacob woke up and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." And he called that place Bethel, house of God. And he reached Haran, and he saw Rachel by a well, and he loved her immediately. And he worked 7 years for her, and the text says that the 7 years seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. One of the most beautiful lines in all of ancient literature. But Laban deceived him. On the wedding night, he gave him Leah, the older daughter, instead of Rachel. The deceiver was deceived. Jacob, who used a disguise to steal his brother's blessing, now received a bride disguised by his father-in-law. And he worked another 7 years for Rachel, 14 years in total. And he loved Rachel, and he despised Leah. And God, seeing that Leah was despised, opened her womb. And Leah gave birth to son after son, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, each name a cry of pain and hope. Reuben, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction. Simeon, because the Lord has heard that I am hated. And Rachel, loved by Jacob, remained sterile, 12 sons in total, from 4 women, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, Zilpah, 12 sons who would become the 12 tribes of Israel, because Jacob would not be Jacob forever. In chapter 32, returning to Canaan after 20 years, alone at night by the Jabbok River, a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. He wrestled all night, body against body, in the dark. And when he saw that he did not prevail, the man touched Jacob's hip socket and put it out of joint. And Jacob, even limping, did not let go. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the man asked, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob, the one who supplants," the name he had carried since birth, the name that defined everything he was, a deceiver, a manipulator, an opportunist. And the man said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." Israel, the one who strives with God. The trickster became the patriarch, and he limped at sunrise, transformed but marked, blessed but wounded. And he met Esau again, and Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. The brother who vowed to kill him embraced him, 20 years of distance. And the text does not explain what changed in Esau's heart. It simply shows the embrace. But the next generation carried its own poison. Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other sons, because Joseph was the son of Rachel, the woman he had chosen, for whom he had worked 14 years. And he gave Joseph a special tunic. The Hebrew word ketonet pasim can mean a long-sleeved tunic or an ornamented tunic. What matters is not the fabric, it is what it communicated: preference, distinction, hierarchy. And the brothers saw it, and they hated Joseph, and they could not speak peacefully to him. And then Joseph began to dream. He dreamed that sheaves of wheat bowed down to his sheaf. He dreamed that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him, and he told the dreams to his brothers and to his parents. And even Jacob, who knew prophetic dreams from his own experience, rebuked him. "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" But the text makes a point of noting his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in mind. Jacob rebuked him with his mouth, but he kept it in his mind. And the day came when Joseph was sent to check on his brothers, who were pasturing the flock in Shechem. And when they saw him from afar, before he came near, they conspired to kill him. "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." Reuben intervened. "Let us not take his life, with the secret intention of rescuing him later." And they stripped Joseph of his tunic, and they threw him into an empty pit with no water, and they sat down to eat. They had just thrown their brother into a hole to die, and they sat down to lunch. And they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites, descendants of Ishmael, the other rejected son, coming from Gilead with camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, going down to Egypt. And Judah said, "What profit is it if we kill our brother? Let us sell him." And they sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. Centuries later, another would be sold for 30. And they took Joseph's tunic, killed a goat, dipped the tunic in the blood, and brought it to their father. "See whether it is your son's tunic or not." And Jacob recognized it, and he tore his clothes. And he mourned for his son many days, and he refused to be comforted. The man who deceived his father with goatskin was deceived by his own sons with goat blood. Genesis does not forget. Genesis collects. And Joseph went down to Egypt at 17 years old, sold as a slave, bought by Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. And the Lord was with Joseph, and everything he did, the Lord made to prosper. Potiphar noticed, and he put all the administration of the house in Joseph's hands. And Potiphar's wife noticed something else. The text says that Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And she said, "Lie with me day after day." And Joseph refused. "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And one day she caught him by his garment, and Joseph fled. He left the garment in her hands, and he ran. And she used the garment as evidence against him, the second garment torn from Joseph that changes his destiny. First the tunic, now the cloak. And Joseph was imprisoned, innocent. in Pharaoh's dungeon, and even there, the Lord was with Joseph. He interpreted the dreams of two prisoners, the king's cupbearer and the king's baker. To the cupbearer he said, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you." To the baker, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will hang you." And it happened exactly as he said. And he asked the cupbearer, "Remember me," and the cupbearer forgot 2 whole years, until Pharaoh dreamed. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 thin cows, 7 full ears of grain swallowed by 7 blighted ears, and no wise man in Egypt could interpret it. And then, 2 years later, the cupbearer remembered, and Joseph was taken out of the dungeon, shaved, dressed in clean clothes, and brought before the most powerful throne in the ancient world. And he interpreted 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine, and he did not just interpret, he advised. Let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let them gather 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years as a reserve for the 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh said, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" And he put his signet ring on Joseph's finger, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen, and he put a gold chain about his neck. From slave to prisoner to governor of Egypt, at 30 years old, 13 years between the pit and the palace. And when the famine came, as Joseph predicted, it hit not only Egypt, but all the earth, including Canaan, including Jacob's house. And Jacob heard there was grain in Egypt. And he sent 10 of his sons, not Benjamin, the youngest, the other son of Rachel, the only one left to Jacob from the woman he loved. And the 10 brothers arrived, and they bowed down before Joseph with their faces to the ground, the sheaves bowing down to the sheaf, the dream of a 17-year-old boy being fulfilled in Pharaoh's court. Joseph recognized them. They did not recognize him. 20 years had passed. The thin boy they threw in a hole now wore Egyptian clothes, spoke Egyptian, had an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah. And Joseph tested them. He accused them of being spies. He imprisoned Simeon. He demanded they bring Benjamin. And when they returned with Benjamin, Joseph set the final test. He hid his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. He sent men to pursue them. He found the cup. And he announced, "Benjamin shall be my slave. The rest of you may go." And then Judah, the same Judah who had suggested selling Joseph, stepped forward. And he gave the longest speech in all of Genesis. He told of his father, of the pain, of the promise he had made to Jacob to bring Benjamin back. And he said, "Let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me?" The man who sold his brother for 20 coins now offered his own freedom to save another. Judah had changed, and Joseph could no longer control himself. He made everyone leave, and alone with his brothers, he wept aloud. The Egyptians heard it. Pharaoh's house heard it, and he said, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" And his brothers were speechless, terrified. And Joseph said the phrase that summarizes the entire book of Genesis, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive." Jacob went down to Egypt, 130 years old, and when he presented himself before Pharaoh, the monarch asked, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" And Jacob replied, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, few and evil, 130 years, and the patriarch called them few and evil. The phrase carries the weight of a man who lost his mother early, fled from his brother, was deceived by his father-in-law, buried the woman he loved in the middle of the road, and mourned a son he believed dead for 20 years. The life of the patriarchs was not glory, it was survival. And Jacob lived 17 more years in Egypt. And before he died, he blessed each of his 12 sons with specific prophecies. And to Judah he said, The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. A prophecy that Jewish and Christian tradition interpret as messianic. The king would come from the tribe of Judah, the same Judah who sold Joseph, the same who offered his life for Benjamin. Of all the sons, God chose the one who had fallen the deepest and risen the furthest. Genesis ends with a coffin in Egypt. Joseph died at the age of 110, and he said before he died, God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And he made the sons of Israel swear they would carry his bones when they left. Because Joseph knew that Egypt was not the destination, it was a stop. The promised land was still waiting, and Joseph's bones waited 400 years inside that coffin until Moses carried them out on the night of the Exodus. Genesis begins with God creating the world and ends with a coffin in a foreign land. From the perfection of Eden to the exile in Egypt, from the breath of life in Adam's nostrils to Joseph's embalmed bones. It is the most ambitious arc in all of ancient literature, covering thousands of years, dozens of characters, entire empires rising and falling, and at the center of it all, a single question that the book never fully answers. If God is good and his creation was perfect, why did everything break? And if everything broke, why does God keep trying to fix it? The answer is not in Genesis. Genesis is only the beginning, the seed, the prologue to a story that has not yet ended.